right, welcome everybody.
Yay!
I guess before we begin, let's just do a audio check. Can you guys hear me okay? I'm in my new living room, so I'm not sure how echoey it is, but if you guys can hear me, say so. And then
Hi, I'm Fiaura. I'm in my studio.
yeah, you have your nice studio. um
Actually, actually, if you want a hilarious thing, my studio is my bedroom,
oh,
but my bed is actually physically located in a different room that is a converted living room, so I can have a studio that doesn't have a bed.
nice. I'm actually using my bathroom closet as my new studio when I get that set up. All right, okay, everyone can hear us. I'm not sure how big the delay is, but welcome everybody to the panel. This panel is called Legally Publishing Your Fan Fiction. I'm joined with my very, very good friend, Fiaura. Say hi, everybody.
I've been promoted to good friend. Hi.
Well, I'm sure you're a really close friend. I'll say at least a close friend.
Thank you.
But yeah, I guess a little background. Fiora, you guys might know me as Chocolate Pony. I also go by an Animorphs or Transformative online. Fiora and I, we often are community guests at a lot of the same cons, and sometimes we're lucky enough that we could do panels together. We did a science panel together, which was very fun. But one other subject that we're both very familiar with is going through the legal wrangles of getting your fan fiction or fan work published. And I've always wanted to do this panel with her. So, yeah, we are going to be presenting it. It's an exciting topic, isn't it?
It is an exciting and exhaustive topic.
Yeah. So I know you've done this panel. You've done your own version of this panel a few times. You told your story a bit. Um, I've this panel does cover a lot of the same things I will cover in my transformative versus derivative. While I'm doing that panel tomorrow, that one is more on the philosophical side. This panel, I think, I really want to focus on the nitty gritty law side, which is why you're perfect because you actually went through a court case to get this done.
Yes, I went through a court case and required therapy and alcohol afterwards.
Oh no. And one of our good friends, Baha, is also in the chat, so I just want to say hi.
Hi, Baha. We'll have more work for you soon because we have stuff that has to be drawn for a project I'll talk about tomorrow.
All right. So let's just get right into it. So yeah, we're probably just going to break down the main parts of the panel, but I guess to begin with, why what got us into writing fan fiction or doing fan work, and why do we want to get it published? And I think this is a really good question for you, since you're probably one of the most dedicated published fan fiction authors in this fandom.
I think I'm just crazy.
We all are.
What got me into this was when I was in college. Spoilers, I was not a great person in college. I needed money, so I ended up writing commissioned furry art for money and making money off of that, and got sick and tired of it eventually, and realized I didn't have to do it anymore, so I quit. And then somebody found all of that under my other name and explained to me where they found it so I could scrub it from the internet, but also basically told me that they would agree to destroy the printed copy they had in their possession of nearly 600 pages of work. And in exchange, so long as I went back to writing and it didn't have to be pornographic, because they wanted to make fun of me, and then they'd actually read it and were like, this is actually decent. So that got me writing again. And what got me writing Fallout Equestria was I was doing a drunk writing stream, and I agreed to write the entire story if we made the stream tip goal that night. I'm not sure that $300 was worth it.
Hey, but it gave you the push you needed, right?
Yes, it gave me the push I needed, and I'm actually finishing the third book tonight ish. I'm working on the last chapter for the third book literally right now. We decided to take our time and actually do this one 100% correct and have the entire book printed and ready to go a month ahead of time.
Perfect. And you were actually the ones who suggested some of these bullet points I put here. You specifically say realize you probably won't make any money, which is kind of true. I think Both our cases, that probably cost us more to get a lot of our stuff published than it did than the profit we made. I guess realize it costs a lot of mental stress, time, and money, and that is also very true.
Yes, it will cost you a small fortune, and
um,
it is nail-bitingly stressful through the entire process. Like, I am permanently addicted to tea at this point because it's a nice calming effect.
I think I need something calming out. Not going to talk about the cod I'm dealing with, but I'm doing some other crazy stuff from behind the scenes. But anyways, so on my end, you guys will probably hear it later when I bring up Alan Moore and Grant Morrison. But from my side of why I want to do this is I do believe in the fun. If you guys know my background, I went to Johns Hopkins. I studied genetic evolution. After applying the evolution of biological organisms to the evolution of storytelling, I realized very, very similar. For new stories to evolve, you have to have some form of reproduction, which means, writing a story again, which means you need to have some type of transfer of information, which is when someone rewrites or retells a story. And each time DNA is, encoded and rewritten, sometimes you get mutations. And same thing for rewriting and retelling stories. Each time someone retells a new story, they add their own little headcanons, they add their own touch, they add something new. And if it's a fundamental change, it completely changes the new concept in the story, and boom, a new story, you have a new biological organism started. So for me, the idea of fan fiction is intertwined with storytelling. Without fan fiction, you can't have storytelling, just like without reproduction, you can't have evolution in biological organisms. And I think that the modern day copyright laws are a bit restrictive. And yeah, we're going to talk about why and what we can do to kind of push, I guess, the new creative fan sphere forward. All right.
So I do this for two reasons. One, I absolutely love. I fell in love with Fallout Equestria after reading it and couldn't get enough of it. I have read every single Fallout Equestria piece of fan fiction on fanfiction.net, all 302 stories. Um, and every time a new one comes out, I just kind of have it playing in the background when I'm working because I just like the setting. And two, because when I was 18, starting college, and had an idea for a book, a professor at the first university I attended told me I would never ever have the ability to ever get published. So Stephen Epsey of Samford University in Birmingham, Alabama, eat your heart out.
All right.
Those are legitimately the two reasons why I kept working to try to have something published.
And as you can see, both of us, we equally have similar and very different reasons for why we want to get our works published. But we also have to go through very similar routes to get our stuff published, which we will cover individually. But first, let's just kind of do a quick overview of what I was talking about, the evolution of story and storytelling. So basically, since the beginning of time, if we could think of our first stories, our first art, were told by shamans, cavemen, around, the fire, telling stories. Most of these stories were important because they were imparting morals and lessons from one generation to another. And as I said, each time these stories are retold, the story slightly changes and it adds something new. In fact, if we think about all the Greek myths we know today, they are essentially fan fictions of fan fictions of fan fictions. And we can see this a lot of tropes we'd like to apply to modern day fan fiction we could see within Greek mythology. For example, we think of crossover fan fiction as a kind of a modern concept. But when you look at Greek myths like Jason the Argonaut, you have Hercules, Theseus, Perseus, and all these different Greek gods all in the same story. Same with when the first modern novel was published in China, Journey to the West. You had Buddhist and Taoist gods being crossed over in the story when normally Buddhism and Taoism are two completely separate canons. And even in the West, when you had the first modern Western novel, Don Quixote, within a year of Don Quixote being published, someone wrote fan fiction of it. So fan fiction is not something new. Fan fiction has been along as old as storytelling itself, and every time we have a new innovation in storytelling, whether that's in print, whether that's in film, we have a new innovation in fan fiction storytelling. And so going closer to that idea of the evolutionary storytelling, Yale professor of literature Harold Bloom talks about this in his book, The Anxiety of Influence. So, in The Anxiety of Influence, he talks about how most new evolutions in English poetry, so every time English poetry makes a new branch, it's because the student was trying to copy the master but misinterprets the works of the masters who came before. And this misinterpretation normally produces something completely new and it adds new branches in the realm of English poetry. And we see this, for example, with Shakespeare. Shakespeare, he retold a lot of historical stories into his own unique plays, and then you had people who grew up reading Shakespeare, like the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings author J.R.R. Tolkien. He, as a kid, grew up and had his own headcanons about Shakespeare. So he thought literal trees were walking in one of the Shakespeare stories. And he also wanted the no man born of woman can defeat Macbeth prophecy to actually be a woman. And when that didn't happen in the Shakespeare stories, he adapted it into his own works, which were Lord of the Rings. So, yeah, we could see this in action right now. And we see this throughout the entire realm of modern fiction. So if we look at modern fiction, a lot of people think Edgar Allan Poe kind of the father of modern fiction. He's not only the father of modern fiction, he's the father of gothic horror, he's the father of detective fiction. And a lot of people say he's the precursor to science fiction. Jules Verne was a really, really big fanboy of Edgar Allan Poe. And in fact, one of Jules Verne's first story, The Ice Sphinx, was a fan fiction of Edgar Allan Poe's story, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym. In fact, he used the exact same characters and the exact same story. He just wanted to continue it. His story ended when the ship went to the South Pole, but were blocked because of these crazy mountain ranges that kept them from getting to the South Pole. H.P. Lovecraft adapted the mountain range in his own story to be the Mountains of Madness, and of course, almost everyone has built up on their own form of the Cthulhu mythos. So we could see that each of these individuals, H.P. Lovecraft, Jules Verne, Edgar Allan Poe, were each the father of their own branch of literature, and yet each of them also got started writing the fan fiction of the predecessor's work. And we see this happening over and over again. The stories of Gilgamesh adapted into like the story of Hercules. We see the Gladiator, Doc Strange inspiring Superman. When people wanted to make their own versions of Superman, we got Captain Marvel. When Captain Marvel couldn't be published in the UK anymore, people made Marvel Man. When the rights to Marvel Man were lost, people made Miracle Man. So we see this happening even in the modern day. And when, as I was saying, each time new innovations in publishing and works advance forward, we see the fan fiction world equally adapt just as quickly. Once printing became accessible to the masses, we started to see in America the concept of what's called the Tijuana Bible become very, very popular. The Tijuana Bibles were little short 8-page comics that normally took popular characters like Betty Boop or Popeye or Humphrey Bogart and made their own little 8-page self-published comics of these popular characters. 90% of these self-published Tijuana Bibles were not safe for work, but so when we think of not safe for work slash fiction being a modern idea of fan fiction, no, it's always been around, just as old as storytelling itself. In the fan circles in both Europe and America, we started to see the concept of fanzines. This is where we get Sherlock Holmes fan fictions and later Star Trek fan fictions, which then popularize a lot of tropes that we now know of today, like the Mary Sue, slash fiction, different types of ships. And in Japan, likewise, they had their own equivalent to a Tijuana Bible, which we now know as the Dondinshi. In fact, every single anime con can kind of trace its roots to Comic-Con, the largest convention in the world. And Comic-Con is just one giant artist alley that sells nothing but Dondinshi. Also, normally not safe for work comics. And where did this change? Well, you guys might know one company kind of taking over everything now. I live right next door. They are known as the Walt Disney Company, and before Walt Disney really got into the legal realm of things, you could publish your own Superman fan fiction or your own Star Trek fan fiction and be able to get away with it. The big change came when a group of underground comic artists in San Francisco, hey, where BabsCon is, created their own deconstruction of Mickey Mouse called the Air Pirates. And their point was Mickey Mouse is a symbol of America. He's a symbol of capitalism. He's a symbol of the market. And to deconstruct America and its capitalistic structure, they thought, well, why don't we just do our own take on Mickey Mouse as a drug dealer? And of course, Disney did not like this and brought them to court. And because of Disney's power, it extended the copyright laws. And we could kind of see this that each time Mickey Mouse is about to fall into public domain, the copyright law is carefully extended just a few years out of reach, just a few years out of reach, just a few years out of reach. And we're actually coming to the next stage where within about 5 years, Mickey Mouse will come back into public domain. But who knows? Maybe Disney will try to get the copyright law extended. And that is
I
why.
have
Oops, sorry, go on.
I have to interrupt here. This is important because the reason why we can't regularly do fan fiction without, the fear of someone with a cease and desist over our heads, the reason why they have that power is because this keeps getting extended.
And
As
that is
soon
why.
as we can, force our politicians to say we're not extending this
Mhm.
and allow something like Mickey Mouse to fall into public domain, this stops.
Yeah.
But you have to actually pay attention to when this comes up and, call your congressman, write your congressman, and make a big stink about this has gone on long enough. Um, and the funny thing is, uh, here in the States, this applies,
Mhm.
but in other countries, it might not. Like in Japan, Mickey Mouse is technically not able to just be done by the Walt Disney Company so long as you put a disclaimer in front of it that says we don't own Mickey Mouse and we're just making fun of him. And Japan's like whatever, and they're usually draconian about copyright law.
Yeah.
And then over in Russia, Ukraine, and most of the former Warsaw Pact nations, they don't recognize copyright extension, which is why Disney is not very big over there.
Yeah, and actually, you bring a good point that it is different in every country. So, for example, here in America, Peter Pan is in public domain, but in the UK, still, Peter, because of a special ruling that has Peter Pan owned by a specific children's hospital, Peter Pan is not in public domain. So you have to carefully check what laws apply in which country. And also because a lot of works are now coming out of the public domain. Mickey Mouse will be out of the public domain pretty soon. Felix the Cat is now in public domain, and Superman will be in public domain soon. However, you can only use what is currently out of public domain. So, for example, if you want to, when Superman comes out of public domain in a few years, you can't tell a story of Superman flying and fighting Lex Luthor and shooting laser beams out of his eyes and saving Lois Lane because the Superman that's going to be in public domain is the original Action Comics Superman. This was before he had his flight powers. That was before Lex Luthor was introduced as a villain. That was before Kryptonite or Lois Lane was introduced. So even if something is in public domain, you can only use the extent of what has fallen to public domain. Same as Mickey Mouse. When Mickey Mouse eventually comes into public domain, we can't use anything that comes after that original Steamboat Willie short until they eventually fall into public domain.
And this is also one of the reasons why a lot of people complain that movies in the last 5 to 10 years have been really static. It's because everything is so heavily tied up in copyright that no one really has the freedom to do anything. And the amount of work and effort that has to get done to make a movie now is to go talk to every other studio and make sure they in no way, shape, or form own any copyright that can stop you.
Yeah, I think a good example in that case is Sherlock Holmes. There's been so many adaptations of Sherlock Holmes from BBC to Netflix to the Robbie Downey Jr. movies. But have you noticed that specific Sherlock Holmes stories, like Scarlet Letter, um, his the last fall, like specific Sherlock Holmes stories have never been adapted, or if they, or at least in the modern day, have not been adapted. It's because specific stories may still be held in copyright. So they have to make their own generic Sherlock Holmes stories, same as Tarzan and John Carter of Mars. Specific stories for Tarzan and John Carter of Mars are in public, are still held by the estates of these authors and their family. But the concept of Sherlock Holmes and the concept of Tarzan may be in public domain. That's why when you see a lot of modern adaptations, they completely clean the canvas and basically create their own Sherlock Holmes story. All right. So I guess we that leads nicely into I guess the next part. We're going to go through these a little quickly so we can get to your specific case first. But because now, like we were saying previously, anyone could write their own fan fictions and anyone could get their fan fiction published. Because of that, a lot of people wanted to make good stories. Like okay, you watch Star Trek, but oh wait, I had a better idea for Star Trek. So people write their own Star Trek fan fiction, and it might be very amazing because it goes more in depth. It goes more into the personalities. It might go into maybe the romantic relationship between Kirk and Spock, and that the show would never tackle. So people are trying to write these fan fictions to reach a wider audience. But once fan fiction started becoming stricken down, people start to realize, oh wait, I can't write for a larger crowd, and now they start writing for smaller groups of friends because these fan fictions can now only be shared in small circles. Before the internet, they only be shared at small conventions or small fan clubs. So you start to see fan fiction start evolving to becoming more and more insular. These stories are being written for a smaller and smaller crowd of people. That means become more niche. That means they might focus on specific fetishes. That means they'll focus more on their self-insert OCs, the Mary Sues. And we kind of see a lot of modern tropes we associate with fan fiction, the Mary Sue, the self-insert, the weird headcanons, is because now that fan fiction can no longer reach a wider audience, they become more and more personal works that are just meant to reach a smaller and smaller crowd. And we see this when fanfiction.net and a lot of internet fanfiction sites started coming up. They were specifically made for specific crowds. Even if we go on FimFiction right now, like if I want to look at My Little Pony stories that focus specifically on an animate transformation. So that's something I like. There's actually a category for specific animate and animate transformation My Little Pony stories. And those stories probably won't get a wide audience release because people might not care about pony transformation. So these
And
stories become more and more insular.
one of the that's is one of the problems with getting published is you have to be willing to show you have enough people
Mm-hmm.
that can identify your specific work as opposed to the work of the show, and be able to visibly tell the difference.
Yeah. So, and this is where we'll get back to like works like 50 Shades of Grey later. Let's just go straight into your case, because yours is a very interesting case. You actually took, so both Fiora and I went to two different paths. I'm using the transformative path where I'm making my work a piece of commentary that does not need to specifically abide by specific court rulings. Fiora went through a unique path where she preemptively wanted to make sure that hers was allowed to be legally published. And yeah, I guess it's your turn to just talk about your experience because we know you went through kind of like a year of hell trying to get your work published.
So the first thing I had to do was around March. I had to file a copyright, which wasn't even officially finished until November, which is one of the very first copies of my book. Don't have a copyright number in them. So if you have one of those first copies, it is actually a collector's edition because it doesn't have a copyright and it doesn't even have an ISBN key yet because those hadn't been legally finished registering. For those who don't know, an ISBN key, International System Book Number. Basically, the barcode on all books is actually an identification number that works everywhere in the world and every version of the book. So, like, the hardback, the softback, the one written in a different language that's hardback, the one written in another language that's softback. So when a comic, ebook, all of them have individual ISBNs. Um, so you have to get that in addition to your copyright, and you can't really get the ISBN until you have a copyright number. So I had to get those first, file the court case. We filed the court case in September. And the court case is basically me going to Hasbro and Bethesda and saying, I have filed copyright for this work. Prove that you can prove to a judge that it is a parody. And they are effectively given, by the court, they are given 30 days from the time the subpoena is sent to prepare their own case. I got lucky in the fact that if you remember, this is the same time that Bethesda had Fallout 76 come out, and that was a media circus lawyer disaster. So their entire legal team on Bethesda's end was tied up with 76. Their whole team. Um, and so I only had to face Hasbro. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide.
Sure. It looks like there's a slight delay, so.
Yeah.
Yep, your slide is up next.
So the picture is actually going to be from the end of book 3, but go ahead and go to the first court case slide.
Yep, it's already up.
So the first day of court was on October 11th in 2017, and the court case ran until February 7th. I could not discuss anything, like nothing. My lawyer even advised against actually acknowledging I was actively in a court case. It cost me $7,000 in legal fees and court case fees. That's not counting missed work, because you're going to spend a whole day of your Monday through Friday every week in court. You're going to arrive. You need to get there at least 2 hours early for you and your lawyer to brief. You're going to sit in court and listen to the other argument. You're going to give your counter argument, and your court time is going to spill over almost. You're going to start late almost every time, and your court time is going to spill over every single instance. And it's not a jury trial. It is a judge lawyer trial, because there are you want to be the aggressor here, because if you decide at some point during the court case that you're not going to win, you can withdraw and go rework your story, rework your copyright, and rework your case and come back. If you're being cease and desisted, or if you're being actively pursued by Hasbro, you don't have that option. But by me being the aggressor, we had the option to pull out.
So it's interesting, because your take, you preemptively went directly to Hasbro and took them to court.
We preemptively went to Hasbro. We preemptively said, we know you're going to have a problem with this, so we're taking you to court instead for you to prove your case rather than us have to prove ours. Which for them, they had to prove I was not transformative. They had to prove I was not a satire, parody, or reinterpretation. And they had to prove I was directly derivative. So go to the next slide.
Okay.
I think this is where we get into the really not fun things.
The slide has changed. There is just a slight delay.
So you have to, first off, when we were preparing our case, which we started preparing in August, we hired 18 English professors at colleges to read our work, watch the first 2 seasons of My Little Pony, and give an interpretation in which they would either submit a draft of a statement to the court, or they had to show up to court. These are the best people you can hire, because an English professor will straight after you get 3 or 4 feedbacks from English professors, you straight up know if you have a case or not. Further, we ended up bringing a total of 8 English professors actually came to the court. We had to pay for their time. We had to pay for their transport and everything, which is part of where a lot of the expense comes in. But they came in, and in addition to my lawyer and Hasbro's lawyer, you have 3 to 7, depending on where you are, neutral cross-examination copyright specialists. two of which are lawyers who at least have the forthright claim to say they are specialized in interpreting fair use. And in my court case, we had three, two of which were specialized in fair use, and one was a copyright lawyer who cross-examined my side of the case and Hasbro's side. And because Bethesda didn't show up, they didn't even have to talk to them. But that everything that was done, these three lawyers would then grill both of us, and it was absolutely nerve-wracking. I ended up having to be on the stand at least every other week with at least one of these lawyers trying to get me to either crack or defend a position or defend, like, one of them had it down to a single sentence in my book had to be defended.
Hmm.
Um, and all before this, as I said, we filed our copyright way back in March. It could take 6 months to 9 months to get a copyright approved in the U.S. Copyright Office. Even longer now until they go back to pre-COVID staffing. And you still have to submit a copy of your work when you print it to the Library of Congress in the U.S. And so I actually had to print a physical copy, and just one of my physical copies was just Library of Congress. I paid for this. Go. Further, Hasbro had the IRS come out and audit me. Hasbro subpoenaed my driving record. Hasbro subpoenaed my rental records. Hasbro subpoenaed my credit score. Hasbro subpoenaed my bank overdraft, my bank records. They were doing everything in their power to discredit me.
Which is not good.
And my lawyer decided the best route for this, because I have a master's degree. I have student debt. I obviously have to keep paying the IRS because I'm a streamer. I can't pay the IRS all at once because none of the money that I get is taken out of my check. So at the end of the year, I ended up having like $2,000 to $5,000 I owe the IRS, and I have to pay that over time. I do have a spotless driving record. I do have a spotless rental record, and my last bank overdraft was over a decade ago. So those things came up fine, but I had to go through an IRS audit during Christmas and couldn't talk about it. Um, and that was all part of it. And the my lawyer's defense idea is priceless. He literally looked at me and said, "Rena, I need you to be human. Don't try to be perfect. Just be human." Going to the next one.
All right.
And also, you're paying the court fees for all of this. This can be a very big bill.
All right.
Going to the next one. This is the legal.
Transformative nature is now on.
Yes. Oh no, before that.
Yep.
You also want to pick your court very carefully. Uh, there are courts that are clearly have their communities, and the court in general has been bribed by corporations. There's a reason why there's a town in Texas that sees like 50% of the copyright cases. Uh, at the end of this, Hasbro decided to cut a deal because they had realized the judge was going to rule against them, and them appealing couldn't stop me because the appeal could take years before it ever saw court. And what ended up happening was Hasbro cut a deal that they would not touch Fanfiction.net or any Fallout Equestria story so long as we continue to give the disclaimer that we do not own the rights and that this is a fan reinterpretation of some aspect of MLP film. And agreed to pay some of the court fees. Bethesda straight up got ruled against and was told, you didn't show up to court, you didn't defend your work, you don't have the right to come after this person. They can appeal that ruling until February of 2023. So they have almost 2 more years that they could bring me back to court. But move on to transformative nature, and I will talk about it next. But that's how it all came out in the end. It was determined that the transformative nature of Fallout Equestria is the idea of taking the logical extremes of friendship, where your over amounts of loyalty and favoritism towards one person can blind you to the destruction that is being caused by that friendship on a global scale. and it was determined that turning Fallout on its head by removing most of the post-traumatic stress disorder and paranoia that is inherent to the setting, and replacing it with the extreme values of friendship, the six elements, effectively, and placing it into a happy cartoon world, but still keeping all of the blood, guts, gore, and murder in it, was well outside the norm of what would be considered uh, the standard Fallout universe, and a complete satire of the standard Fallout universe, because one of the biggest highlights we gave was that the very first thing the player is asked to do is kill raiders. Casually walk up and just kill a raider. And instead, in Fallout Equestria, we treat the act of killing even a raider as as a horrific moment. So the satire here is that Fallout actually treats human death as something casually that happens, and in a lot of cases, especially when we were showing clips of Fallout 4, as something that's just comedic.
Hmm.
Because we not only showed Fallout 4, but we also showed react videos from YouTube to show how people reacted to this, and showing that indeed people consider Fallout 4 to be more comedy than anything. Whereas in Fallout Equestria, a single death is a tragedy and is awful and traumatizes every character along the way. And that is my court case in a nutshell in 20 minutes.
And I think for the next part, we're going to go through specific court rulings. And I think anytime one of these cases was used in your case, just chime in and let everyone know.
Okay.
So first, let's just go over what Fiaura just went through. So she had to go through and prove factors of fair use. I guess anyone who watches any YouTuber will probably know this entire concept. H3H3 went through their own lawsuit because of this. So factors of fair use are normally for specifically. So the purpose and character of the use is the first one. So whether it's commercial and non-profit, that we're not going to really get into that right now because most of the stuff we're doing is commercial. The second one is the nature of the copyrighted work. So how much of it is in public domain? So like I said, there might be some parts of it in public domain, there might not be. What nature are you using it in? The third one is how much is the work used in relationship to the work as a whole? So if you're doing, let's say, a fan fiction of the first season of My Little Pony, how much of the actual episode stories are you using in that retelling? And the fourth is the effect upon the potential market of the work. So, for example, in Fiora's case, her story is much darker and probably will not appeal to kids, while Hasbro's My Little Pony appeals specifically to kids. So, Hasbro market is a kids market. Fiora's market is not. So, how much of it is going to affect that market? So, a good example is someone wrote an encyclopedia, a fan made encyclopedia about Harry Potter. All right, you might think that might be fair use because an encyclopedia about Harry Potter would be educational. However, by him releasing his own encyclopedia about Harry Potter, it will infringe on J.K. Rowling's market if she ever wanted to make her own encyclopedia about Harry Potter, and thus the court struck that one down. So just remember how much of the market is your work going to be affecting. Now, one of the major cases I think that was brought up in your case specifically was, actually, let me see if I can bring it up, is the Campbell versus Acuff Rose Music, which was decided by the Supreme Court in 1994. Is that correct?
Yes. Part of that case was the idea that if you have a song that sounds similar with the music tones but has different lyrics with different characters, it's the same song as what the original band wanted to claim. However, Campbell turned around and told the music record, "No, this is a different song," and it was so like it's the same music beat, almost string for string, but the words are so radically different that no, this is not the same song at all. Um, and that was one of the cornerstone cases we used was that music claim. Hasbro attempted to say at the start that I had pulled a Catcher in the Rye, and then we kindly pointed out that Hasbro had no intention of making a Fallout Equestria sequel to MLP Film, and nor could they show evidence they had ever any intention of ever doing so. So I could not be classified an unauthorized sequel. Um, the judge immediately agreed when Hasbro the next time we got together said they could show absolutely no plans.
And I think the quote I like using from this specific case, the Supreme Court Justice says, at least in part, comments on the author's work. If, on the contrary, the commentary has no critical bearing on the substance or style of the original compositions, the other factors like the extent of commerciality looms larger, which also applies in your case specifically as well.
Yeah, because like I refuse to sell my book to anyone under the age of 13. Like just flat out. I've had three moms come up to my booth at cons and try to buy my book for like their little kid, and I'm like, I cannot sell this to you in good conscience. And one of them complained, and I said, "You're gonna give it to your little 6-year-old right there, right?" She went, "Yeah." I'm like, "No, just no." Um, and that's part of it is Hasbro has no intention of making an adult version of My Little Pony for adults, and what I have made is clearly a story for adults.
All right. So I guess for some of you guys who might be confused about Fiora's court case ruling, because hers is a very unique, specific case that involves Hasbro and Fallout Equestria, I thought I will show three other similar court cases of fan fictions that are trying to be published and explain why the judges ruled on their specific ruling. So first, we'll use Coming Through the Rye, which is an unauthorized sequel to Catcher in the Rye. It's basically a retelling of Catcher in the Rye, but with the main character 60 years later. Now, why this was not allowed to be published, even though it was technically a parody, was it was basically just retelling the original Catcher in the Rye story, but instead of being a kid, this guy's now an old man, 60 years later. And his retelling really added no unique substance to the original story of the original Catcher in the Rye. The second work is The Cat Not in the Hat. It's a retelling of the O.J. Simpson murders in the style of Cat in the Hat, in the style of Dr. Seuss. So now you might think, okay, well, of course this is satire. Of course this is parody. This is what Mad Magazine does. You're using Dr. Seuss to tell an O.J. Simpson story. Not so fast. The reason why this was not allowed to be published was because it used so much of Dr. Seuss's style and art style and writing style, but it provided no critical commentary on Dr. Seuss itself. If you're trying to use someone's copyrighted, at that time, copyrighted style, you have to use that style to comment on the original person itself. So I think that's what your case did. You used it to comment on Hasbro's specific My Little Pony show, which is not the case for a lot of other pony fan fiction I've seen out there.
And also, part of this example here is making sure that your characters are distinctly different enough that at a glance, no one can tell, no one is going to associate one character with the other. And the way that we pointed this out was on our cover is a green pony.
Mhm.
And we told Hasbro, how many green ponies are in your show? There's one. Tree hugger. That's it.
And I think that came after
And
yours too.
yes, Tree Hugger does not appear until the second half of season 6, and I filed copyright before that. So, whoops. She was previewed in animation in 2015, but never actually shown in the show until 2017. And I'm like, by the way, so yeah, there wasn't a green pony in the show at the time besides her with a single episode, and that was one of the points that we made was no one is going to associate this with My Little Pony for the other reason, the fact that the background of this is literally a nuclear wasteland.
Yeah.
Um, so if you look here, the Cat in the Hat, he literally has the same hat, just with a recolored red. He has the same kind of glove, and you really can't tell the difference at a glance in their face until you actually look at it and realize one is a cat face and one is a person. And that's one of the reasons why we could prove we were not trying to just immediately stomp on them is because the characters looked were distinctly different, and I had included artwork in the book to show the characters being distinctly different from those in the show.
All right. So let's look at another case that actually won. So this is one I like citing a lot. The Win Done Gone. It's a so you might think it makes the same mistakes as the previous two works. It's a retelling, so a direct retelling of Gone with the Wind. Um, so why is this allowed to be legally published? Well, it's retold from the perspective of the black female slave in the story. So when you think about Gone with the Wind as a whole, it's a story that celebrates the antebellum South. It's aimed for middle class and upper class white folks. When you retell a story that's aimed for upper class white people from the perspective of the lowest member of society and the antebellum South, a black female slave, it completely changes the commentary and the social dynamics of the original work. So because it recontextualizes the original Gone with the Wind work, um, it adds a new layer of political commentary, it adds a new layer of social commentary, and thus it transformed the original message of Gone with the Wind. So while it does retell Gone with the Wind nearly step by step with every single story beat, because it's retold from a specific character's perspective that was not the main feature of the original work. It was just legally allowed to be published, though it had to have a disclaimer with a sticker on the front that says an unauthorized parody.
Yeah, that's kind of like how Weird Al, when he does songs, he oftentimes will put an unauthorized parody next to the title, just to emphasize. Like he does usually get permission from the musicians, but sometimes their music labels don't want to give him permission, but the musician does, so he puts an unauthorized parody next to the song when the music label doesn't. Further back on the distinction of the characters, one thing that we did get to cite for a court case that was very recent in 2017 was Harmony Gold versus Harebrained Schemes and Piranha Games, which is if you're a fan of Giant Mecha, Harmony Gold is the reason why like Macross and Robotech didn't get published worldwide because they took all of the distribution rights for anywhere else in the world. And in that court case, the judge ruled that no, you cannot copyright an art style. Giant robots can be drawn, and so long as those giant robots do not definitively have an individual name, but their name is either a model number or a manufacturing name, such as Abrams Tank, it is not copyrightable. And further, the judge also found out that Harmony Gold didn't actually have any of the copyrights to begin, couldn't find their own copyright to begin with, so they lost all of their rights at the end of the case. But it's why we got to have MechWarrior 5, which is not great, but we also got to have the BattleTech strategy game, which is pretty decent. And that was one court case we were able to cite because the judge actually specified art style is not copyrightable.
And since we keep on mentioning parody and satire, I do want to say that there is a distinction between parody and satire. Parody is normally using a so if we're looking at specific work or trope, parody normally is a comedic commentary on it, while satire uses the work for a critical message. So, for example, if we look at the superhero genre, how two different Japanese anime mangas looked at the American superhero genre, we have My Hero Academia on one side that could be said as being a parody. It's normally because it falls under the realm of comedic commentary. So when we look at things that are parodies, they're normally love letters to a specific work. Yes, it might point out specific tropes or flaws, but it's really a love letter to that work. So Flex Mentallo would be the equivalent in the American comic scene. While One Punch Man we could see as a satire of the superhero genre, One Punch Man offers a darker critical message about the superhero genre as a whole and of course about the Japanese workplace and Japanese environment. And we could also see in the case of the American comic book scene, Watchmen is the critical satire of the superhero genre. So there is two very distinct differences between parody and satire. All right. So one thing that normally comes with when someone does do a parody or satire is the nature of deconstruction and reconstruction. So I like to bring up both Alan Moore and Grant Morrison because they are both crazy British people who believe in magic. But in the realm of magic, there is a concept, an alchemical concept called solve a coagula. Basically means separate and rejoin. So when we think of works, most parodies that are allowed to be legally published are either a deconstruction of a work or a reconstruction of that work itself. So, of course, a good example of a deconstruction is Watchmen. What happens if we take superheroes to its logical extreme? Well, most superheroes will probably not be the happy, glorious Boy Scouts as we see with Superman. They'll probably be disturbed, mentally ill. They probably would stink really bad. They probably wouldn't wash. And if they actually had superpowers, they'll probably fumble it up and end up hurting and destroying the world or taking it over, which I believe is something that you were addressing in your works as well. The concept of deconstruction, taking a genre or a specific story to its logical extreme.
Yeah, we had to cite a lot of K-Cat's original Fallout Equestria work as saying, well, if we assume that Rainbow Dash will never be disloyal, then the logical extreme is that if she is torn between two friends, she would rather die than have either of those friends hurt each other. And Hasbro was like, their lawyer their lawyer came here to fight a legal case and did not come here with what I would call well versed in story and English theory crafting. So we kept making sure that we were putting their legal team on the back foot by having them have to actually respond to things in commentary and then have a English professor ready to go give us an expression. So that was part of it, was making sure you deconstruct the concept of loyalty, of honesty, of laughter, deconstruct what is funny, um, which was a fun thing to do, in my opinion. It was one of the few times that I could actually go home and feel like I wasn't, wasting money or spending a huge amount of time for something that's never going to work. Um, so yeah, the Marvel and DC seem to have this idea that trauma and horrible PTSD make great superheroes. No, no, it doesn't.
All right.
Please don't do this.
So it looks like we have about 20 minutes left. So it's going to be my specific case I'm going to cover. I'm going to try to go through it as fast as I can so we can leave room for questions and answers. I will cover my side more in depth tomorrow at my panel, Transformative versus Derivative. But if you guys do have questions, either in the Discord chat or the Twitch chat, feel free to start asking your questions. And I guess I'll just go straight into my side, which is trying to get your fan fiction published without the court because you followed each of these transformative measures. And if someone tries to sue you, you automatically could just bring up all these previous lawsuits and see, yep, I met this, I met this, I met this. You're good. Now, before we even want to worry about lawsuits, the easiest way to actually publish your fan fiction is what it's called following off the serial numbers. We see this many, many times. So, for example, 50 Shades of Grey is a Twilight fan fiction that was allowed to be published because they just changed the names of the characters. Immortal Instruments was a Harry Potter fan fiction that's allowed to be published, and I think it's now a TV show or a movie because they just changed the names of their characters. So the easiest way to do it and the safest way to do it is if you want to use your own specific analogs or pastiches of main characters. If you already had a nice story about Rainbow Dash, maybe just changing the name around. That's the safest way to do it. Now, from that point is where you want to try to make your work truly transformative. If the specific goal of your work is making a transformative work, then at that point, then you have much more legal grounds to stand on, and you might be able to still use these copyrighted characters. Now, you could be very subtle with your deconstruction, or you could be on the nose with your deconstruction. I think with Fiora's case, she's more subtle with her deconstruction. It flows naturally in the story. For me, I like being more meta, and a lot of my deconstruction is right on the nose. And I'm going to use the example of my comic series I've been trying to finish for a while. I'm very sorry, I'm very slow in my own comic works, but I've been working on this for a few years. It's a comic that I call Horse Famous. That is basically a deconstruction on the first 3 seasons of My Little Pony. So let's go to each of the slides. So I guess a good example of following off the serial numbers and changing the characters is them fighting herds. Main Six originally wanted to do fighting as magic. Hasbro said no. Lauren Faust jumped in and said, "Hey, why don't I design new characters for you?" And there, they were allowed to go. So my route is I looked at works that were truly transformative. And of course, the one I like setting a lot is Watchmen. Watchmen was originally going to be Alan Moore's comic that looked specifically at the Charlton characters that DC Comics just bought and wanted to do his own logical conclusion to superheroes that the Charlton characters originally presented. DC was like, well, we don't want you to kill these characters off specifically. So Alan Moore's like, all right, I'll just write my own analogs of these characters. So Rorschach became the Question became Rorschach. Nightshade became Silk Spectre. Captain Atom became Dr. Manhattan. And then boom, like I said, a new branch in the realm of storytelling. Watchmen ushered a new type of comic to be out there. Unfortunately, it had the exact opposite reaction of what Alan Moore wanted. Alan Moore wanted his comic to be the death nail to the superhero genre in general, so comics could freely explore other genres. Unfortunately, it kind of ushered in that grim, gritty PTSD era of superheroes that Fiaura was just talking about. But most people don't understand, aside from what Watchmen did in the story level, deconstructing the comic books, doing the deconstructions, Alan Moore completely changed the nature of the comic book storytelling format. So, for example, Watchmen was specifically supposed to be a comic, a story that could only be told in comic format. Well, unfortunately, we do have a Watchmen movie and a Watchmen TV show that proves Alan Moore's story could be told in other formats. Alan Moore specifically wrote Watchmen to be told only in a comic. Because of that, if you look at the nature of Watchmen, so for example, one of the most famous examples, the cover of Watchmen, the first cover of every issue of Watchmen is normally a zoom in focus on a specific item. So on the first issue of Watchmen, it's the bloody smiley face. You open the page, and the first panel is that bloody smiley face now zoomed out. So Alan Moore is now using the cover of the comic as the first panel that leads in directly to the next comic. And if you also notice, almost every single issue of Alan Moore's Watchmen, the first panel and the last panel are mirror images of each other. It's the exact same image or the exact same imagery, but it's completely inverted. And if you ever do look through Watchmen, you could see the smiley face with the blood. You could see the clock with the minute hand hidden throughout the entire comic series. And one thing I'll go in more of my panel tomorrow is the wordplay he does, the juxtaposition. He will have words, the characters speaking words on one page, and the action overlaid is doing something completely different. So there have been many attempts to adapt and reboot Watchmen. We have the Watchmen TV show. We have the Doomsday Clock series. We have a new Rorschach series. I would say the one quote-unquote fan fiction of Watchmen that came the closest was Grant Morrison's Pax Americana. Unlike Alan Moore, Grant Morrison was actually allowed to use the Charlton comics, and he was able to write his own version of Watchmen, but with the original characters Alan Moore wanted to use. Now, as much as Grant Morrison says he hates Watchmen, he viciously spent 13 pages of his autobiography saying how much he hates Watchmen. He understands Watchmen better than most of the current showrunners and comic book artists who are doing their own sequels of Watchmen. So if we look at the cover of Pax Americana, it's very similar imagery. It's a burning peace symbol on fire. You open the page, the first panel is that same burning peace symbol on fire. Yet the way that the burning peace symbol is kind of folded, it looks like a figure 8. And then the last panel of Pax Americana, it's the superhero domino mask held up, and it looks like the figure eight. And then you realize, wait, eight also is infinity, and there's 8 panels instead of the 9 panel grid Alan Moore uses. Grant Morrison is using an 8 panel grid. He is completely pulling all the techniques that Alan Moore is using for his comic and adapting it and pushing it further in his own retelling of Watchmen. So that is what I try to do with my comic Horse Famous. One of my favorite panels in Grant Morrison's Pax Americana completely takes Alan Moore's wordplay dynamic with the panel and shifts it upon itself. And when the slide loads, you could see how the word bubbles all lead into each other, and it brings the reader into a weird S-shaped formation. And you could see how it's not, like I was saying, it's not completely subtle. But when you see the senator says another door opens, a door is literally opening behind him. When the superhero says you twist everything around, the literal panels are twisting back forward. And then when the senator says the country is about to hit rock bottom, both characters are literally at the bottom panel of the comic. So he is taking these Alan Moore techniques of having both the words and imagery represent the same thing while also referring to two completely different things. And I tried it here with my Horse Famous comic with my analog of Twilight Sparkle and my analog of Discord, following a very, very similar format and trying to use a very, very similar technique. And these are the covers I did for each of the issues of my Horse Famous comic series, and I actually represent each of them to represent a different era of comics. So the second issue I drew after Jack Kirby's Fantastic Four, and it represents the Silver Age of comics. The third one I drew after the famous Superman vs. Spider-Man comic, and it's supposed to represent the Bronze Age of comics. And the fourth one represents the same thing Alan Moore did with A League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, representing the modern age of comics. And you can see that I emulated the styles as close as I could to the original comics that they were supposed to represent. I guess when the slide loads, you can see that. But yeah, so you could see each cover and each panel, each of them tries to mirror the other. Now, this goes into what I really liked about Alan Moore, and another technique I completely took from Alan Moore was Alan Moore. So if you guys know, Alan Moore famously did his League of Extraordinary Gentlemen series that started in Victorian England, and that's also a good rule right there. Alan Moore was allowed to do the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen because the Victorian characters are in public domain. So you could use characters from Sherlock, you could use characters from Dracula, you could use Jekyll and Hyde, you could use the Martians, you could use Captain Nemo, because these are in public domain. However, Alan Moore tried to take his League of Extraordinary Gentlemen to a logical conclusion, and eventually it went to the 21st century, the modern era. So what's the biggest UK sensation in the modern era? Of course, Harry Potter. Well, Harry Potter is really, really tightly held under copyrights. How is Alan Moore able to publish his own critique of Harry Potter without using Harry Potter? Well, what Alan Moore did was really, really brilliant. He realized that J.K. Rowling herself was not original, that Harry Potter is essentially cobbled fanfiction of other British boy wizard stories that came beforehand. So, for example, the concept of a magical witch school in Scotland came from a kids series called The Worst Witch, which was also a BBC series. The idea of a glasses-wearing boy wizard came from Neil Gaiman's Book of Magic. The concept of a secret platform at King's Cross that takes you to a magical world came from the story platform, The Secret of Platform 13. And both the words muggles come from the same author who wrote the book Larry Potter and Her Best Friend Lily. So Alan Moore realized that everything about Harry Potter was made up of all these different elements. So instead of specifically copying Harry Potter, Alan Moore made his Harry Potter composite a composite of every single previous work that J.K. Rowling copied to present his case. So if J.K. Rowling ever wanted to sue Alan Moore, she will basically have to admit, oh yeah, I copied Harry Potter from all these specific sources as well. So it was a really, really brilliant checkmate that Alan Moore did with J.K. Rowling. And I kind of took that for my My Little Pony series. So each of my main six characters, if, when the slide loads, you can see each of my main six characters. Not only is each of my main six characters more closely related to the G1 characters that Lauren Faust originally wanted to base her show on. That and if you guys actually don't know, the G1 characters, a lot of them are no aside from Applejack, a lot of them are no longer in copyright by Hasbro. That's why they couldn't use them. Aside from Applejack, the other five G1 characters are in public domain. So not only did I do that, I also made each of the characters a representative of a Hasbro of a property that Hasbro is actually in competition with. So, for example, Honey Pie, my Applejack analog, is actually based off Strawberry Shortcake's pony. Starlight Strike, my analog of Rainbow Dash, actually comes from Rainbow Bright. So and then my analogs of Rarity and Fluttershy come from Philly Fantasia and Horseland. So each of my main six
So,
characters is from a different property that Hasbro does not own.
this brings up this brings up a point I want to make real quick.
Yep.
One of the hilarious things about Bethesda, and this will show you how much of a mess ZeniMax Incorporated and Bethesda Studios' legal department is.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why they haven't remastered Fallout 1 and 2 is because they can't verify they have the rights to Fallout 1 and 2 from the now extinct Black Isle Studio, simply because one of the copyrights for Fallout 2 is actually filed under the former lead of Black Isle Studio and current head of Obsidian Entertainment, Mr. Krieg, as opposed to being filed under the studio. So they can't even verify they own the copyright.
Yeah, that's actually why BBC still needs to license the Daleks whenever they do a Doctor Who series with the Daleks because that was also an accidental copyright filing because it went to the creator of the Daleks and not BBC itself.
I found that out during our court case and was like, "Oh my God, that's hilarious."
That's actually that's actually why even though Captain Marvel, the original the superhero we know known as Shazam, was originally the first Captain Marvel, they forgot to file the copyright for Captain Marvel, and so now Marvel can use it. Okay, it looks like we have about 5 minutes left, so I see that Fiaura, you're already starting to answer questions in the Discord. If you guys have any other questions, please put them in either the BB and sorry, I'm Sophie. I'm reading your BBC bought the Daleks recently. Accidentally said BBC. You guys can put questions in either chats. I guess if we go over, we'll answer your questions directly through text. The next part we're going to talk about is just the nature of franchise culture, and we covered that a bit in the previous slides we were talking about. But if you guys want to know more about this, I'll cover it in my panel tomorrow versus transformative versus derivative. But basically, quickly just going over it, Fiaura, chime in whenever you want. The main thing about why copyright holders think they should be allowed to have the copyrights is they're trying to protect the artists. They're trying to protect their properties. And in reality, no, they are not protecting their artists. Because if you think about the real creators of DC and Marvel universes, Jack Kirby, Siegel and Schuster, and Steve Ditko, they actually died penniless. Sadly, all these individuals died penniless, even though they created the entire DC and Marvel universes. Marvel and DC are making money off their films. A lot of these creators couldn't even get a ticket to go see the movies that these characters are based off of.
And what's his name? He died recently. He's the guy who makes all the cameos, who was like the owner of Marvel.
Oh, Stan Lee.
Stan Lee in the 70s, 80s, and 90s used hyper aggressive contracts and tactics to strip artists of their recognition and copyright so he could say he owned the comic as opposed to the artist.
That really bugs me because Steve Ditko really created Spider-Man, and Steve Ditko actually died the same year Stan Lee did. So he actually died recently. he designed Spider-Man's costume, and in fact, he would draw out the entire Spider-Man comics and just leave the word bubble blinks. And then Stan Lee, like playing ad libs, will go in and fill in the word bubbles. Stan Lee really had nothing to do with Spider-Man, yet he gets all the credit from Spider-Man. When the real creator of Spider-Man, Steve Ditko, he died the same year as Stan Lee, got no recognition, even though Into the Spider-Verse and Spider-Man 2 came out. And that's just really
which
sad.
is which is why you'll also notice on almost none of Marvel's comics is there an artist name on the cover.
Yeah. It's called the Marvel House Method now.
Yeah.
Um,
Basically, if you sign up to draw for Marvel, you will never get recognized for drawing for Marvel except at conventions where people can recognize your individual work.
which is why, for anyone who wants to work in the comic industry, just try to make your own original property first before you start working for DC, Marvel, even IDW. So on that, because we were talking about that recently, the idea of so if fan fiction used to be the experimental way for stories to evolve, and copyright holders now control these franchises, and they want to keep their copyright safe, what happens? Well, what Alan Moore and Neil Gaiman talk about is basically in regards to the American superhero comics. It looks like almost every single modern superhero is just a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy of a Silver Age comic, because these copyright holders want to make money. They always normally try to play it safe. They always do reboots and sequels that play it safe. They don't try the experimental things. You're not going to get a Mountains of Madness from a Jules Verne story because everyone is trying to keep the things playing safe. So I normally like to turn the chessboard around and look at the copyright holders. If you judge these modern reboots, these modern Star Trek and Star Wars and Transformer movies, by the same standards fan fictions need to go through the courts to get legally recognized, nearly every single modern property would fall flat. They would not be considered transformative under the same case. And I think that's really, really unfair. And that one restricts the original creative works, which are the fan fictions, from ever having some impact on the world stage. And yet the photocopies of the photocopies of the photocopies. And remember, I study genetic biology. What happens when you inbreed something over and over and over and over again? You get some really ugly looking offsprings. That's all I'm going to say. A good example is look at all the copies of Simpsons and Family Guy. The modern state of adult animation is all just crazy, inbred, ugly looking stuff.
I have seen clips of Cruella. I don't wish to see that at all.
Oh yeah,
It
like
is her spoiler alert, her mother was killed by Dalmatians. That's why she hates them.
oh
What?
boo-hoo, oh sad. Yeah, so it's not really really good. Some of the slides I skipped over. I will link it into both chats, and I'll actually talk about it in my panel tomorrow. I'll go more in depth with that tomorrow. I think.
They wanted to know if we could link the document that the slides are in, since it's view only.
Oh yeah, I just linked it in the chat, both chats.
You're a vendor here, right? So if I hit hashtag chocolate pony,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. So, yeah, I guess any other words you want to say about, aside from Cruella is a good example. I think the new CGI Rugrats is a good example. Both attempts to reboot Powerpuff Girls, both the live action one, which had that script leak that everyone hated, and the attempt to do a new Powerpuff reboot was really bad. And as much as it's making money, even the new Transformer movies are a complete night and day of what Lauren Faust was doing with My Little Pony, and even with what Lauren Faust was doing with My Little Pony, you saw what Hasbro started to do with Equestria Girls. So.
Also, side comment.
Yeah.
The actors from the canceled Powerpuff Girls movie made bank, and no one even knows their name.
Yeah.
So they don't even have to have like the stink of their name associated with this. They just got, a couple $1 million, and the movie never even played.
Baha says the favorite parts were the leaks from the scripts. I will admit I had a lot of pleasure reading those Powerpuff Girls scripts because I was like I'm trying to imagine Bubbles and Buttercup saying what is
Oh
that all that
God.
all that Gen Z talk.
Yep.
So I mean, it's not that it's bad. I mean, you could love Michael Bay's Transformers. You could love the new Cruella de Vil movie. I just think there should be an even playing ground where we have works that play it safe and works that also try something completely new. And if we are stuck in that realm where we can only have franchise holders release works, it's just going to be the same play it safe photocopies of photocopies. For example, I love Last Jedi. That's very controversial. I like Last Jedi because it tried to do something completely different with the Star Wars franchise. But people hated Last Jedi and everyone loves Force Awakens. Why? Because Force Awakens was a nice safe story that basically just retold A New Hope. I think there's both room in this world for Last Jedi and Force Awakens. The problem is 90% of the stuff being pushed out now is just Force Awakens.
On a side note, Choco and I are vendors here. Choco, I believe, have Chocolate Pony has his comics,
Yep.
and other things that he sells and his artwork and all that wonderful stuff down in his channel, Choco Pony Tarot and Flags, and down under Fiora the Tank Girl. That's all of my stuff, including my books. My third book, it does come out at Everfree. And right now, I'm going to go ahead and tell you if you don't go on my website and pre order it, I can't promise I will have a book for you because I know that because I already like the first like run, 60 out of 100 of them are already sold. Because I did the books in 100 unit runs because it's expensive. But if we pre-order all of them, I can do 2 runs at once, and I will have 100 books. So if 40 more people pre-order between now and August, I will actually be able to do 2 runs at once.
Yeah, so yep. Feel free to support not just us but all the vendors. This pandemic has really affected us con vendors. This is a lot of our livelihood, so this really affects us. So thank you very much for helping us out. I think when cons do come back, Fiora, you'll be soon announcing the next, I guess, book in your release, and I'll hopefully have, hopefully by Everfree, an issue of my Horse Famous comic ready for sale there. So make sure you support us out,
I
support all the other vendors.
I can't say terribly much about this.
Yeah, I
However, I can say that the next book comes out, and I will work on something else before I go back to finish the series. And I've already started signing the agreement with a particular entity known as Games Workshop and Black Library, and that's about all I can actually say.
All right. So I guess we'll plug other panels we're doing. So if you're very interested in the topics we're just talking about, I go into the more philosophical side of this in my panel tomorrow. It's called Transformative versus Derivative. So I look more in depth about the nature of fan fiction and franchise works, on why I don't think franchise works should exist the way they do, and what we as creators and artists can do to change the game. I'm also doing my convention history panel tomorrow. So if you guys want a non-pony panel, but talks about the background history of how these online cons came about and how cons themselves came about, check that out. And then I'm doing a panel with my good friend Midnight. She's one of the current artists here for BABSCon. I was the original artist for BABSCon, and our panel is just called Dark Chocolate, and we'll just talk about whatever. And Fiora, what panels are you doing for this con?
So tonight I am on Lady Slinging Booze Part 2. We're going to teach you guys how to bartend and how to come up with drinks, as well as show you some of our favorite drinks. And then Doodle's going to take it away from me and proceed to explain to you how to brew and how to legally brew your own alcohol. And then tomorrow I have the Fallout Equestria presentation where we're going to talk about Fallout Equestria, where it came from, how it got to be there. I'm going to have a bunch of voice actors on there who participate in fan projects, including Ellie Ray Hennessy. And also, we are going to be presenting 3 pieces of work. Cinder is going to be presenting a very special piece of work, and I'll let her introduce that. But we will also be presenting a new song. Ode to Alguasil will officially be released tomorrow. And also a News from the Bunker episode featuring Dusty Cat, Inky Notebook, and Jasper Pie will be released tomorrow. During that panel, we're releasing all of this tomorrow during that panel.
All right,
And
sounds
then you'll
fun.
be able to interrogate our voice actors and director and animators and everyone else.
All right. Thank you guys very much for joining us for our panel. Check out the artists, check out the panels, just support BabsCon. And when cons come back, be there, be healthy, support us. And with that, thank you guys very much. We hope you had a really good time at our panel. Enjoy the rest of your time here at BabsCon Online.
Yes. And again, we wouldn't be here without your support. So thank you guys for watching, and hopefully we'll see some questions at the very least about the things we make. Good night, everyone.